At an occasion sponsored by Ezra and his supporters in Calgary a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned my view that I've written a number of times, that our university system now is largely an unemployment deferral operation. At immense cost to society, as you said, we have these millions of people ostensibly studying subjects that they could not possibly earn a livelihood from when they graduate. And I think you were absolutely right, and the first person to say it, though you now have many emulators, as in many other things, that any course describing itself with the word studies is not a serious academic subject. And this is true. No one is going to make a living out of gender studies.
Except in human resources. Yeah.
But, I mean, my fear is in the United States, and I know that guy from Savannah. He's called upon, and I tried to help him a bit, but it's a little impractical, I'm afraid, what he's trying to do. But the endowments of these American universities in particular are so immense, they can carry on just, living off what's been accumulated for a long time. And the loyalty of alumni to their universities, no matter how corrupted they have become, is startling to me. But I mean, as a practical matter, Jordan, we aren't going to see the university simply disappear. I mean, they won't disappear, and perhaps that's unfortunate, but you think there's no chance of an evolution in response to these signs of hope that you described? I mean, a positive evolution.
Not really. Well, the thing is that the system is so overwhelmed by people who are possessed by this quasi-religious ideology that I can't see practically how that can be altered. People, once they're in a university, are there pretty permanently. And the younger the people are in the university, the administrators and the faculty, let's say, the longer their tenure, and the overwhelming majority of them now are not only woke by temperamental proclivity, but woke by selection practice. So, I don't know if you know this, but it's a good thing to know. So before scientists are hired in the University of California system, which for a long time was an outstanding public education system, say what you want about places like Berkeley. I mean, the University of California system was a shining star. Now, before you can have so when you're hired as a scientist, it used to be a pretty cut and dried procedure in some real sense to be hired as a research scientist at a university. The only thing that mattered was how many publications you'd managed to produce in journals, scientific journals in your specialty, and the journals were pretty much rank ordered in terms of quality using quantitative metrics. And so the higher the status of the journal, the more attention your publication would receive from your peers, the more additional research it would generate. It's a pretty good measure of the impact and the practical significance of your research, insofar as those things can be quantified. It was quite well quantified. And so essentially what you did if you were a young researcher was send out you worked like a mad dog in graduate school. Hopefully you had a good supervisor. You produced somewhere between 2 and 8 publications. If you were really pushing the envelope, it would be up at 8. You'd have a couple of those in high impact, well-recognized journals, some of them specific to your area, and then some of them influential enough to be multidisciplinary, a few rare journals like that. A selection committee would take a look at your resume. They'd rank order the candidates by publication quality, and they'd peel from the top. And that was a pretty damn good system. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't perfect in part because it didn't do a great job of selecting for teaching prowess. But that wasn't the fundamental purpose of research institutes, at least so they thought. But all things considered, it was a pretty strict merit-based system, and it worked very well in the University of California system, for example. Well, now 75% of the dossiers of junior scientists are not even considered, they're rejected out of hand because the diversity, inclusivity, and equity statement is not sufficiently well developed, whatever the hell that means, to allow them to pass muster. And if you want to get some sense of exactly the state of your benighted country, and mine as well, you could go online and read the frequently asked questions for the submission of your diversity, inclusivity, and equity statement for researchers who are applying, let's say, for grants in Canada. And you'll find a policy that basically states, no matter what you've done on the diversity, inclusivity, and equity front in the past, no matter how stellar your performance in adhering to this ideological idiocy, don't be thinking for a moment that you've done enough. And you can't just tell us how you've already kowtowed sufficiently so that we'll provide you with money. You have to explain in detail not only how you're going to follow the rules as they are already laid out, but how you're going to adapt to any rules that we might impose on you at any point in the future. And if you think that's an exaggeration, you go read the frequently asked questions yourself. You couldn't write a more Orwellian document if you got a committee of Ottawa bureaucrats together to write it, which is exactly what happened. It was plenty Orwellian. And so, you know, if you can destroy the University of California system in relationship to the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you can do that in 5 years. It's pretty much what's happened. I don't think there's a hell of a lot of hope for the universities. If you can subvert the entire grant process in Canada to an ideology that purports to claim on moral grounds that the way that you should rank order scientists is by their skin color, their sex, and their gender, there is no bottom to how corrupt and perverse the universities can become. So no, I'm not particularly optimistic on that front. So, and don't be thinking the scientists are going to save you, because they're going to fold a hell of a lot faster than the people in the humanities folded, because they're nowhere near as prepared for the political battle. Let's put it that way. So no, I'm not optimistic. It's pretty bloody appalling as far as I can tell.
Jordan, I did not, by my question, I did not mean to imply that I was optimistic about the university. It just seems to me that they've got this mighty gravy train that they've amassed over decades, and they will plod on, but other than in the learned professions where it's hard to do without them altogether, it seems to me their significance and influence will steadily decline, and economic factors are going to put immense pressure on the faddishness that they're selling. We see it now with all the nonsense about accommodations of climate change and going to sustainable energy that nobody can afford. But, and by the way, I agree with you about the scientists. I made the horrifying mistake a couple of weeks ago of seeking out and reading an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. I mean, I've never read such bunk in my life. But anyway, my brief here is to keep us somewhat on the track of rights, status of rights, liberties, how are we doing on that front? And in some respects, what you have predicted, I don't doubt accurately, of a decline of the universities. And as their influence declines, their morale will decline. They'll just become a kind of infestation. That isn't all bad in terms of what happens to our liberties. The influence of the universities will decline as their strength and morale and vigor decline, I think. I mean, am I talking rubbish? I mean, I'm trying to find, I admit I'm not an optimist, but I'm trying to find some potential wellspring of future optimism.
Well, there are all sorts of alternatives springing up on the potential horizon. I mean, it's definitely the case. Now, it's not easy to duplicate a university online. Now, various attempts have been made to do this, and they usually suffer from the delusion that a university is primarily lectures, exams, and accreditation. So I suppose if you had to extract out 3 things that universities do, those might be the most obvious. But you should never, I read a great book a long while ago when I was a kid called Systemantics, and one of the maxims of this book, John Gall wrote it, was the system does not do what its name says it does. And that's a lovely thing to keep in the back of your mind. And it isn't obvious what universities do. You know, they provide, well, so why pay $150,000 to go to university? Well, how about to find a wife or a husband? Right? That might, just that alone, because you have a select pool then of people who are roughly your, say, intellectual and social peers. The universities for a long time did a pretty good job of screening applicants, and so it might be worth $150,000 in 4 years if one of the things you accomplish between the ages of 18 and 22 is you meet the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. That's a big deal. Well, it gives you 4 years to mature. It gives you 4 years to learn how to be independent. It gives you 4 years. It allows you to purchase a socially sanctioned identity for 4 years that you have to make some sacrifices to maintain. Let's say you have to go to class and study, but while you're doing that, you can actually think a little bit, you can learn to be a citizen, you can contemplate your future, you can experiment, and you can all do that while you're becoming more mature and independent and looking for a partner. And the universities do provide all of that, and you know, God only knows, maybe that's enough even without the classes. It's not easy to duplicate that online. Having said that, the possibilities for technology-mediated education are so vast now that they're almost incalculable. And the technology that enables education to proceed is developing at an unbelievably rapid rate. And so it's certainly possible that alternatives to the technical education system that we have now are going to pop up very, very quickly and very effectively. I mean, I'm involved. My daughter and I primarily at the moment are working on an enterprise called Peterson Academy, and we have 30 professors already signed up and have recorded a number of courses. We think we can drive the cost of a Bachelor of Education, a Bachelor of Arts, that's our first target. We figure we can drive the cost of that down to $4,000. She thinks we can do it for half that. So now, you know, that's sort of, you know, that's premature applause because that's a hell of a lot easier said than done. But I don't think it's impossible, and I think the universities are doing such a spectacularly terrible job, especially at providing education in the humanities now, that you wouldn't have to put together that credible an alternative to be able to cut them off at the knees, and that's basically the plan. And so I'm not pessimistic in terms of what the world has to offer on the front of general mass education. I think we have opportunities there that have never been available to people in the entire course of history. I mean, even on the podcast front, let's say, it's become pretty clear to me that the audience of people who can watch and listen is probably 10 times as big as the audience that can or will read. And so that's quite the multiplying factor. And it's certainly the case now that it's far easier for many people to do a 3-hour lecture or a series of 3-hour lectures on YouTube and publish that instantly at zero cost and reach far more people than they'd ever reach with a book. And this is not to say that I have anything against books, because books make you think rigorously for a long period of time, but man, well, and look what Pierre Poilievre did in the last, when he ran for the Conservative leadership. I mean, he just walked around the legacy media and just spoke directly to people online, essentially, and that worked like a charm. And so there's lots of technologies that are sitting there waiting to be utilized intelligently to give the universities a run for their money.
But keeping my nose to this grindstone of the matter of rights and liberties, and not trying to lead the witness, am I right then that in saying that the decline of the university actually in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of thought formation is a good thing, because they lose their monopoly or quasi-monopoly. There is this, if I may use the word in a sensible way, diversification, and the power of the restrictionist and authoritarian dogmatists of the universities declines, and the freedom of society actually might benefit from that? Or am I being too hopeful?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. You know, I mean,
No, but you're the sage here. What do you think is going to happen?
what do I think is going to happen?
On that subject.
I think things will probably get a hell of a lot worse on the university front before they get better. That'd be my guess. I mean, I can't really see. I figure a third of the universities will go broke in the next 5 years. I just can't see how they can't. I think they can't. I can't see how that can't happen.
So we have a kind of St. Vitus dance in the universities, and then it's like a revolution, you know, like the French Revolution. We get the reign of terror before we get Thermidor.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that seems to be happening too, although the evidence on this is mixed, is, you know, increasingly universities, especially on the arts side of the spectrum, let's say, are dominated by females. It's about 2 to 1 in many places now. But it turns out that the women stop attending once the ratio falls below 2 to 1. And unsurprisingly, because, as I said, part of the reason that universities exist is so that young people can go off and find a viable mate. And if that function has been decimated, and it's already been decimated, because the picture's actually more dreadful than you'd expect just looking at the 2 to 1 ratio. Because it doesn't mean there's 2 girls for every guy like the Beach Boys song. It means that the pool of eligible men has shrunk to almost non-existent, and, well, the pool of desperate men has remained the same. And that's technically true, and this is very frustrating for young women. And so the men are starting to bail out of the universities like mad, and that's been happening really over about a 20-year period. But when the boys leave, the girls will leave too. So it'll just take longer. So now, will that be a net benefit in terms of freedom of speech? I don't know. Things are so unstable right now and changing so rapidly. I can't really claim to see more than about 6 months to a year ahead at most. I mean, not only because things are so stable and strange politically, but there are things, and everyone in the audience should know this, there are things coming down the pipeline on the artificial intelligence front that are just going to make your hair stand on end within the next year, because there is so much transformation going on in that domain.